Hello, this is Frank Capello from The Lever, an independent investigative news outlet. This mini-episode is part of our Inside the Story series, where we highlight some of The Lever's original reporting and speak with the journalists who wrote the story. Today, I am joined by Jordan Ewell. Jordan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to talk to you about this story that you wrote. So your new story for The Lever is about an ongoing lawsuit in Texas, which could possibly result in limiting critical speech against billionaires. So, Jordan, what is this lawsuit about? Who is suing whom and why?
So, Kelsey Warren, who started an energy company in Texas called Energy Transfer Partners, he is now the chair of the board. He's no longer CEO, but he's still deeply involved in this company, and they're huge. They're a huge natural gas provider and pipeline company. He's suing Beto O'Rourke, who ran for president, who ran for Senate, and most recently ran for governor of Texas against Greg Abbott, who is running for re-election. He's suing over comments Beto made on the campaign trail. Now, throughout this campaign, one of the big issues was how Texas could prepare and protect against winter storms like the one they saw in 2021. And listeners might remember in 2021, there was a deep freeze in Texas that froze a lot of the energy infrastructure in the state, and that included natural gas pipelines. And Texas is a big gas state. Because these pipes froze, millions of people were left without power. Hundreds of people died as a result. And Kelsey Warren's company, Energy Transfer Partners, bragged on an investor call about making over $2 billion just from that storm, because during these blackouts and the shortage of supply, they were able to raise the rates for natural gas. So that's a big issue in the campaign. At the same time, the Texas legislature starts discussing a bill to respond and protect against similar incidents going forward. They wanted energy companies to winterize their infrastructure. That makes sense, right? Well, for whatever reason, and Texas's lobbying disclosures are not very helpful on this front, but you could speculate why the bill ended up exempting gas companies from this winterization requirement. Now, 2 weeks after that bill was signed by Greg Abbott, Kelsey Warren, again, the chair of the board of this big natural gas company in the state, donates $1 million to Greg Abbott's campaign for re-election. This was his biggest single campaign donation in the state in his life. Now, looking at that, you might think, hey, that's suspicious. So Beto pointed that out throughout the campaign. And he used a variety of different terms, and I think at one point he called it bribe. That's a common description in progressive circles for special interests, CEOs, and billionaires donating to politicians who will ultimately do their bidding. You could reasonably conclude that's a quid pro quo. Some might even say a bribe. And in progressive circles, when you want to talk about the role of money in politics, that's a very common way to describe those sorts of donations. Now, Warren is suing Beto over those comments and saying that he defamed him. Those comments constitute libel, and he is now suffering from mental anguish because when Beto tweeted about these things, these donations, the replies were all in agreement that Kelsey Warren engaged in unethical and unscrupulous behavior. So now he is suffering allegedly from mental anguish, and that's where we are now.
Wow, there's a lot of details in there. Thank you so much for breaking it down. One giant thing that stuck out to me, very unsurprising that Warren is suffering mental anguish over the comments and not suffering mental anguish over the hundreds of people that died over his pipes freezing. So just wanted to highlight that really fast. So this type of lawsuit is known as a SLAPP lawsuit, which stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. So what is the usual objective of a SLAPP case like this?
SLAPP cases are typically without merit. The person filing them, often someone very wealthy, very powerful or politically connected, will file them to silence, to intimidate, to scare the person on the receiving end. There have been a few of these in recent years that people might remember. Most notably, the Gawker case you could describe as a slap suit. Hulk Hogan, his legal claim against Gawker was funded by Peter Thiel. That was widely assumed to be in retaliation for Gawker outing Peter Thiel early on in his career. And what they wanted to do was shut that site down. In that case, they used the publication of Hulk Hogan's sex tape. But in others, John Oliver was sued for criticizing a coal tycoon in 2017. He did a segment about a coal company in West Virginia and a disaster that killed several of its workers, and how unethical coal companies are in that industry. The CEO of a big coal company sued John Oliver and tried to get him to stop, say they were defaming him, and made similar accusations that Warren is making about Beto now. In that case, that was dismissed. But, however, in the Gawker case, it was not. So sometimes these are successful, so you have to worry. But what they ultimately try to do is just silence and intimidate their opponent.
So what is the current status of this lawsuit between Warren and Beto?
So right now, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Texas is hearing a motion by Beto's team to have the case dismissed because they know it's without merit. They know Kelsey Warren is totally exploiting this system just to try to scare Beto and ward off future candidates from talking about the role of money in politics. That's the real consequence here if this is successful, because this sets an example that other billionaires and other CEOs and other special interests can follow. Hey, you don't like what someone's saying? You don't like that they're pointing out what you're doing with your money? Just sue them. In some states, there are laws to make it easy to get these cases dismissed because they know they're without merit. A few years ago, Greg Abbott rolled those laws back in Texas. Now it's harder to get these cases dismissed. So it makes it easier for billionaires to exploit this system to silence and intimidate their opponents. We don't know when the Third Circuit Court of Appeals is going to rule on this motion. Maybe it'll be soon. Maybe it'll be in a few months. This is just the way the judicial system works in this country. You just wait and find out. So right now, we're in the waiting game.
All right, I guess my last question would be, Jordan, are you expecting to get hit with a slap lawsuit as a result of reporting this story?
You know, I chose my words very carefully in this piece because it's very easy. I think people need to consider how easy it is for billionaires to just throw a legal team at you. If you're in the working class, you don't have the same sort of resources as a guy who's worth $5 billion from natural gas. He has an extremely high-priced law firm who is probably willing to duke it out with Beto as long as possible and make this really expensive for Beto. That's also part of the strategy, right? It's not necessarily that they're going to win. It's how do we take as much money from these people as we possibly can? How do we waste their time and make this a living hell for them? So who knows? We'll see. It's a great reason to subscribe to The Lever if you want to help support our potential legal defense fund.
Oh, it's bound to happen at some point. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Jordan, really, really great work on this story. And thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Frank.
Listeners can find the link to Jordan's full story in the episode description in your podcast player. And if you enjoyed this story and would like to support The Lever's original reporting, you can go to levernews.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. You can also share this podcast episode with your friends and family who would like to hear about this story. And if you really want to support our work, you can go to levernews.com/subscribe to become a paid supporter. This gives you access to all of The Lever's premium editorial and podcast content, and you will be directly supporting independent journalism. And that is all for the low price of just $8 a month, which, as it turns out, is only half the price of a standard Netflix account. Thanks so much for listening, and keep rocking the boat.